All right. Five, four, three, two, one.
Hello, I'm Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 93rd Nonprofit Empowerment Webinar. And I'm a little intimidated by introducing our special guest, but put it this way. Number one, first of all, we met in 1974. I was a junior at George Washington University, and Alan Paul was the executive director of a trade association called the Agriculture Council of America. I needed a part-time summer job, and in a less politically correct era, ACA needed a gopher boy, and I was their guy. And said, well, we need someone to pick up a movie projector and things like that. And so it was an opportunity for me to do good summer work. And then I graduated with a degree in urban affairs. I didn't know what to do next. And the folks at Agriculture Council of America invited me to upgrade myself from a part-time gopher boy to a full-time gopher boy. And probably, I got to tell you, it was the best decision I ever made in my life. And the name of this webinar is called Write Like You Speak. And it's my privilege to introduce my first, he was the boss of my boss of my boss, and my writing mentor, and probably who taught me more about good writing and a lot of other things than anyone along the way in my journey. And it's a pleasure to introduce from Raleigh, North Carolina, Alan Paul, who is a very accomplished writer and author. And as I said, he taught me how to write. So if you don't like my writing, blame him.
Yeah.
And now he's written 4 books. Now, a lot of people have written 4 or more books, but I don't know if you can find anyone who's written on such diverse topics as, and I want to make sure I have the pronunciation, Patton. Is that right, Alan?
Yeah, that's good.
And it's a book about Stalin's massacre, and it became the most authoritative book on that subject. And Alan, became a bestseller in Eastern Europe, and the Polish government twice decorated Alan for writing that book. Okay, so you're writing about world history. From there, he jumped on, and guess what? He wrote a book about a dog. Okay, and how's that? And it's the story of how a skunk dog gets rescued that's about to get shot and then becomes an agility champion. And it's a story of why family matters and the deep bond, in which I know something and Alan knows something more than me about humans and their pets. His third book is called College Sports on the Brink of Disaster. It was co-authored with John LeBar, and it's a very timely discussion about reforming college sports. It's very heavy on research and presents a lot of exciting concepts. Now, if that's not a variety enough, the 4th book he's working is on the history of the Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, Durham. And that's a book that Alan tells me he's getting up at 5:30 a.m. And I'm sure there are people who have written 4 books, but I challenge you to find someone who's written on such a diverse variety of content. Our producer is Michael Argent. Michael, will you tell our learning audience, and we have nonprofit leaders, that we have executive directors and CEOs and directors of development and board members and donors and volunteers who make up our learning community. If they want to, I'm going to challenge them. We're going to take your pulse in a moment. We're going to ask you a few questions. For you to join us, and Michael, help me, they can type in the chat space, or if they have a question, and we'll break away at any time. I have several questions ready for our guests, but if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. And Michael, do you want to just review the instructions of how they can participate in this webinar?
Sure, guys. So you can either type your questions in the little Q&A box down there, or you can click, you should have a little raise hand button. You can click that, and then when we come to a break, I'll click the button to let you talk, and you can actually ask your question. And those are the two ways. And I also see, we've got Kathy Barrera in the attendee chat.
Okay, I tell you what, can we welcome Kathy? And can we elevate her to join us on screen?
So
and
Kathy, I
put
just
that-
I clicked promote to panelist, Kathy. You should be able to accept that.
And then if you could go to that slide that says job board.
All right. All right, Kathy, we've got you as a panelist now. If you can just-
Kathy, how are you out there, Kathy?
I am out here, Jim. Thank you. I'm sorry that I was having difficulty coming in through the other link, so went in as a.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I greatly appreciate you offering this.
Kathy, Alan, Kathy and I used to work together. Kathy, Alan and I started working together in 1974. Kathy and I didn't meet until a little bit after that. And she has done very nicely in her career track, and she's now executive director of a great organization called the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And Kathy, can you take 1 minute, or maybe I'll give you a whole 90 seconds to talk about the work of HACU, and then you're going to announce 2 jobs that you're trying to fill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. So the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities is a 501c3 nonprofit that was began here in San Antonio on the campus of Our Lady of the Lake University, which represents Hispanic serving institutions all across the United States. We also have an international membership in Puerto Rico, Latin America, and Spain. And we have some main pillars, which are advocacy. We continue to advocate for federal funding for the Hispanic serving institutions, and then programs and services around career and professional development for students attending the Hispanic serving institutions and the faculty, staff, and administrators at those institutions. So that's kind of our quickie.
About how many members do y'all have?
A little over 500.
Wow. Wow. And Michael, can you put up that slide that says job board?
Yes, I can. All right, let's pull that up. And all right.
Okay,
guys should be able
Kathy,
to see it.
for anyone out there, they can apply themselves if they know someone who would be appropriate. Kathy, we always love to talk about great job openings for great organizations. You're looking for a director of development and grant writer. Why don't you talk a little about each position?
So for the director of development, they'll actually support the development office by expanding our outreach to foundations and additional corporate partners. That has been my primary role since I began with HACU 6 years ago. We're looking for the person to have a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience and some experience in obtaining funding at the $100,000 or level higher with partners, and then also prefer that they have some experience with a fundraising database such as Raiser's Edge. And we're hoping that they are fluent in Spanish, since Kathy is not, and we do have, as I mentioned earlier, partners in Puerto Rico, Latin America, and Spain, which I find difficult to communicate with, and would like somebody that enjoys that. We do some travel to those areas as well. So if someone's interested in a little bit of travel to support the organization, that's possible through that. And then the grant writer is a new position as well. And that position is to identify and submit grants to federal, state, and private agencies, also looking for a bachelor's degree and 3 years of experience. And the one component to this position that's somewhat unique, maybe for a traditional grant writer, is that we will also have this person prepare and present a workshop to our members on grant writing at our annual conference as a pre-conference event. So someone that enjoys training others on the grant writing as well would be very helpful to this position. And I'm thankful Jim put the slide up, so if you have any questions.
I'll tell you what,
information-
Michael, could you click on that URL address?
So I actually
that's
just
how you
posted it in the
apply.
chat already. So if you guys
Okay.
look in the chat, that link is already in there.
And
you wanna
so
click on
can
that.
even if you want to apply for yourself, or if you want to recommend someone, you can use that URL link. And by the way, Kathy, Alan was my first boss back in 1974. And now it's a small world. Kathy's boss is someone I worked for at the University of Texas, San Antonio, back in the 1990s. So one way or another, all our paths cross. Kathy,
Yeah.
thank you for the wonderful work that ACU's doing for the nation.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Oh, and before we go any further, we've got a hand raise from Joel Batowski. If it's for you, Kathy, I just want to get him on before.
Joel
Before we move
is
on.
one of our learning community members from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so we always have time for Joel.
Hi, Joel. You should be able to speak now. I just gave you the option. I think you might be muted.
I unmuted myself, but I didn't. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to say welcome everybody and just say even a fly doesn't get a slap on the back until he starts to work.
Okay. And Joel, thank you. You served our nation for what, 26 and a half years?
Yes, 26 and a half.
And
Somebody
now,
do it.
and very active in veteran work. So thank you for the leadership you
And
provide.
nonprofit work and raising funds for worthy causes.
Very good. Okay, before I go to our Q&A with our subject matter expert, we would like to take your temperature, or if a writer might give me some fancy words, this is an environmental scan. And so if you could quickly type in responses to these 5 questions, this will give us a little more appreciation of where the audience is coming from. Number 1, what communications project are you working on right now? If you could type that into the chat space, okay? Michael, are you seeing anything?
We'll just give him a little bit more time to type it. I'll read any of them that come in though.
Okay. Question number 2, what do you enjoy most about writing? Mine is finishing it. Okay. Question number 3, what do you find most challenging about writing? And question number 4, what time of day is your favorite time to write? Is it morning, afternoon, or evening? And the final question, and I hope you're all very fast typists, what do you enjoy most about your writing? Is it the research? Is it writing the first draft, or is it the editing and polishing part? So we're asking, and Michael, tell me when we're getting some responses, and I'm going to get ready.
So I got a response from Kathy. She says she likes writing proposals for partners. She writes in the morning, and the challenge for her is being succinct.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Anything else?
And then I think we had somebody raise their hand. It looks like it's gone now, but whoever that was, if you want to raise your hand again, we could and you wanted to actually answer Jim's questions. Oh, it looks like we got a few in the Q&A. Oh,
Okay,
chat is disabled. Oh, it looks like chat is disabled for some reason.
let's empower it if we could.
Okay, attendees can chat with everyone. Panelists can chat with everyone. Okay, sorry about that, guys. The chat should be working now. I got a few in the Q&A though. So we got from Ann Criswell, we got she's new to consulting and she likes writing proposals. For she said most challenging is that it's never good enough. From Howard from Howard Feinberg, we got 100th anniversary, getting started after 10 PM, and the hardest part is final edits. From Dr. Ed Sikowicz. I'm
Sakowicz, I
sure I'm
believe.
saying that wrong. The hardest part is writer's block, research, and finishing. And
Okay.
then Anne says that she also writes in the morning.
Okay. Very good. We'll use that as context as discussion continues. And remember, as I talk with Alan, if you have any questions along the way, please just enter them into the Q&A box and we'll try to respond as quickly as possible. But Alan, number one, are good writers born or are they made? And if they're made, how do they get there?
Well, I think that's a great opening question. I think more are made than born. A lot of writing talent is frittered away because it's hard work. It takes elbow grease, and there's no substitute for solid, reliable, interesting research, for also the ability to put good sentences together, to have a profound understanding of how much detail, because good books are often choked to death with excessive detail. It's a delicate balance. It doesn't work without detail, but you have to have it. And then the ability to look at it from a global standpoint. Thematically, does it work? Am I able to maintain the audience's interest from start to finish? There are lots of questions like that, but those by and large are things that you only attain through hard work and effort. They're not natural gifts. The natural gift is being able to put words together in a creative way. But I'd say the most important, and I'll stop on this, natural gift is the love of writing, to like it, to enjoy it. That's a real gift, and a lot of us don't appreciate that, I think.
Okay, here's my second question. Why do you think so many people are more afraid of writing than speaking to express themselves?
Well, I think instinctively people know that it takes effort to produce good writing. And so, you know, it's not nearly as extemporaneous in nature as speaking. Sometimes, so if you want to take a measure of that, think about all the politicians that spout hot air. It's a very common thing. We talk off the head in all sorts of social interactions, and it just kind of comes naturally. But trying to put it together in a compelling way in black and white, it definitely causes a lot of angst, and people shy away from that challenge. Hopefully, don't turn away from it, because I think that fear and concern can be overcome.
Alan, I remember in the late 1970s, you gave me a paperback a book by Dr. Rudolf Flesch, and I think was called Writing on or Speaking on Paper or something like that. And what's it take to embrace that approach, that really your writing is merely speaking on paper?
Wait a minute, I'm getting some interference.
I'm going to ask, what does it take to speak on paper, to take that approach? You're going to speak on paper. That's what your writing approach is going to be.
I just got some interference. I don't know whether it's coming from you or from somewhere else. It doesn't matter. Just briefly repeat that question, because
The question is, how can you embrace the writing approach of speaking on paper?
Oh, I got you. That's a good question too. Flesch was really iconic in that whole area of writing like you talk, or writing like you speak.
Yeah.
And I think what it really, a lot of it boils down to is listening carefully, to listen to speech patterns of people you're having a conversation with. Think about your own speech patterns, and keep it simple, keep it direct, and don't spend a lot of time adding a lot of unnecessary or cluttering detail. That's all very important part of accomplishing that goal.
I'm amazed that you've written 4 books on so very different topics. I'm writing 2 books. When I write, it's about 3 subjects: fundraising, fundraising, and fundraising.
Right.
How is it possible for someone like for you to write on such diverse contents and subjects?
Well, I think this is a possibility that members of this audience can entertain and even think about accomplishing it in their own work. First of all, I'm a generalist. I'm not a specialist in anything. I proceed on the kind of the philosophy that if I can understand the subject, then I can write about it in an interesting and useful way. And so I like to learn about new subjects, and it does require a lot of research. And that's one of the most enjoyable parts of the writing process to me, is because, first of all, it's a lonely profession. You're sequestered in a room with the door closed for hours on end, and you don't have much interaction, a few phone calls occasionally, but the research gets me out of the office. I go see people, talk to them, interview them. I like to record these interviews and conversations. I always have a transcript made because it's easier later on to work from a transcript. But I think it actually is what I'm really trying to say. I think it's an asset to be a generalist. I know all of you are specialists in fundraising, but you might be like me in many other areas, lack any expertise. And I wouldn't dream of trying to write a book on any subject that I wasn't prepared and motivated to spend a lot of time researching.
Dr. Flesch was also a proponent of writing in plain, simple English. How do you define what is, and I know you taught that me many years ago, what is writing in plain, simple English? Well,
you were a good student on that very point, Jim, but I think again comes back to write like you talk to a great degree. We don't use a lot of 4 or 5 syllable words in our normal daily conversation. People that like to throw around what do we used to call them? 50-cent words. They'd be more expensive today, but you don't want to. It's not something that you're trying to show off your knowledge. I think you have to put it on the level of normal daily conversation. That doesn't mean you don't have profound and complicated subjects to try to present, but they can and should be presented in a very straightforward manner without a lot of pretense or superfluities, I guess we could say.
Yeah. Then why do so many people feel compelled to complicate their writing and use complex and technical components that most readers can't even understand?
Well, I think that's a temptation for a lot of people because it's an easy out. Now cut and paste is a commonly used function, is readily available to anyone. You can copy a passage out of some book or from a website or any one of many sources and paste it into a document. That's you're not supposed to do that without proper attribution, and you really should to use it. Rewrite it with put your own imprimatur on it. But I think it's an easy out for a lot of people. A lot
Yeah.
of people, as you said or earlier, are intimidated by writing. And so, they feel like, well, I've got to go to the experts, see what they say, borrow from that, and try to get through this as best I can.
Alan, probably a nonprofit writer's two favorite tools are stories and facts. What are your recommendations on weaving those two together, stories and facts?
Well, I think that's a lot of what writing is about, the juxtaposition of good stories, anecdotal material, and facts. You really need the facts. I said earlier, and I don't want to overstress this, but you can, I think, choke a manuscript to death with superfluous facts.
Yeah,
And the facts, really a good guide on the facts are, do they enliven the text? Do they trigger curiosity in the reader? And I would cite an example from my own writing that I think is fairly representative. I was writing this first book on, part of it dealt with the German attack, the Luftwaffe attack on Poland on the morning of September 1st, 1939.
yeah,
And they strafed the apartment building of a family I wrote about. And the young girl was looking out the window and she said, and they had the radio on, she said, oh, they must be our planes, they're crosses. And her father looked out and he said, no, those are German crosses. They were painted on the fuselage of the Luftwaffe planes. And just at that moment, the radio announcer said X number of planes are attacking Krakow, and we don't know
yeah,
how long this assault will continue. So I got all that information, and when I started writing it, it occurred to me, well, I wonder what kind of radio that was. And so I went back to the family and found out it was a Philco. Now that sounds like a small detail, but I would argue that it does enrich the text to a degree, and it's worth chasing down things like that because they have some level of importance. You can go too far with it, but just one small illustration.
right. Alan, no matter what the format is, a big goal is to come up with an enticing lead, okay? Because if you don't catch the reader at the beginning, you're not going to be able to hold on to them. So how do you know when you have a good lead?
Well, I'm going to give you a yardstick. That's a wonderful question. I love that question because my first job was with the Associated Press. I was in a very small, about a 3 or 4 man bureau, and we had a stern taskmaster who oversaw the work of novices like myself.
Yeah,
He said, you've got to make the damn lead interesting. If the first sentence or so is not interesting, you lose the reader. You have to write something that gets their attention and then holds their attention. And so I would say, one of my favorite way to address this wonderful question is that probably, certainly in my opinion, that others may have other favorites, but my favorite lead of all time is Jane Austen's opening sentence in Pride and Prejudice. And she wrote, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Now, think about that. That was most of you probably have read Pride and Prejudice. Why that's such a phenomenal lead to me is that she condensed a 300-page book into one sentence.
wow.
You read that 2 or 3 times, you see that's what the book is about. She told the whole story in a single sentence, and I just marvel at that.
That's
Wish I
what we
could
like
do
to
it.
call the hook, right? That's the hook.
That's a hook. That's what I call a hook. Do you want to go
Now-
forward or not? Are you going to quit?
Yeah.
You don't want them to quit. You
The workhorse when it comes to communications is still the news release. of, I don't care if you're a profit or a for-profit, what goes into a well-written news release?
Well, I think, not to overstress this, but I think the lead is there applies. You want a very interesting, sentence or two that kind of encapsulates and, ideally, stimulates interest, makes people want to read on. I think that the good news release does not err on the side of hype.
Yeah.
Saying that, well, our organization is doing wonderful work that
Yeah,
is praised in 20 countries, even though you may be doing that. You have to be careful with self-praise.
Yeah.
So I think again, arranging the facts in an interesting way is indispensable to getting something out that will get picked up and used by media and passed on to a larger audience.
in one of your books, you take on the daunting task of finding a voice for the main character who is a dog. Okay, I'm not trying to make any analogies here, but our nonprofit staff typically have to write for the CEO or the board chairman. What's your recommendation on finding voices?
Well, you hit on a very important question. Voice, I think in literature is extraordinarily important because it just, it makes the narrative more intimate, much more intimate. I'll just use this example you raised. I wrote a book that was inspired by my own dog. And the title of that book sort of tells a story. It's From Honey with Love, My Life as a Second Chance Dog. And from the very beginning, I sensed that this book would be much better if it could be the dog telling the story rather than me telling the story. And there are a lot of, that's not any idea I came up with. There's a wonderful book called The Art of Racing in the Rain. If none of you have read that, I would urge you to get it, by a guy named Garth Stein. And it's just a terrific book that's all told by the dog. And so the dog in this instance, I decided that voice was important. So how did I get that voice? And I had a very difficult time for a month or more trying to hear this dog's voice. And when I could finally hear the dog speaking in my ear, I had it. In the book, I was able to write the book in fairly short order because I really had the cadence of the dog, the age of the dog. It was a young dog, the other characteristics. All of that had to be reflected in the voice. Well, now, is that irrelevant to what you're doing? I don't think so. If you're writing something for the CEO, and I have had the privilege of writing for some fairly high-powered political figures, long enough to learn that if it's a good speech, it's the senator's. If it's not a good speech, it's yours. I suspect that same syndrome applies in each of your organizations. So the pressure is on you. It will help extraordinarily if you can listen to that CEO talking and you can devise a way to capture some of their cadence, some of the way they go about expressing themselves. If it's a speech you're writing, certainly in that genre. But I think even in other forms that you might be called on to write, I think giving some attention to that is well worthwhile. It just makes it more authentic.
Yeah. When we were working together in the 1970s, I think we were primarily writing for the eye and maybe a little for the ear. And now we have such a vast variety of media. There's traditional print, there's email, there's text, there's web, there's social media. How would you categorize good writing fitting the media.
The media,
Yeah, whether it's,
whether it's text or,
yeah,
okay. Well, I don't think I think you can rule text out pretty quickly. I mean, it doesn't demand good writing, it demands staccato.
Yeah.
It's
and brevity.
but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's
Yeah.
sort of de rigueur. You have to do it. When you get to stories or articles for a website, I don't think it differs very much from a magazine years ago. I mean, magazines are disappearing. The local news media is disappearing. We have a lot less investigative journalism going on. But I think a lot of the same techniques and standards would apply to writing for a website, which most of your constituents, people you work with, have to do. And to have a good website, you certainly have to update it frequently. That's something I fall short on, but I really want to try to do something about. But it's I don't think I think the approach, the techniques, the creativity, none of that's changed. It's just the form they take.
Yeah.
And I think with the exception of text and maybe a few other things, you have to respect a lot of the old standards for producing something, sentences that are interesting, stimulate curiosity, and make sense.
Another question we hear a lot is how long something should be. Is less always more? How do you know how long your project should be, your writing project?
Well, that's a tough question. I think that it would be glib to say when you've got it finished, you'll know. I don't think that is quite that simple.
I don't think so either.
No, I think you have to consider the total the total scope of the subject that you're dealing with. Once you've done a lot of research on it, you then will need to produce an outline. I write everything, all my books I've written from a tight chapter outline. And I put a lot of effort in that. If I get a good outline, then the book, it goes much more smoothly. That doesn't mean it doesn't change. It does change, and you need to be flexible all the way through the process in terms of being able to adjust the new information, because you will discover new information as you go along. But I think in the day-to-day world of people who are not necessarily writing a book, but are writing an article for a website or a fundraising appeal, or God, we haven't even talked about a pitch letter. That is everybody in this audience has got a big demand, and you can't miss on that. Maybe once, but not too many times.
Yeah,
You got problems. So I think it's figuring out. After you've done enough research, what are the things that are absolutely indispensable to making my point, and get those down on paper, and then work with them in the most creative way that you can to produce a compelling article or pitch letter or whatever. So it's preparation, preparation, and preparation.
I don't know if our audience can relate to this, but I've worked for CEOs and boards who would say, Eskin, keep it short, but make sure this is in, and make sure this is included, and don't leave this out. Length is not an easy destination to arrive at.
Right. Well, I think there is a temptation to sort of approach that subject in sort of an easy but not necessarily a serious way. you have to be, brevity certainly counts. You don't want to have superfluous words in your text.
Yeah.
I think in the writing process, for me, one of the more enjoyable, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the most enjoyable, but is editing. And I start my day with writing every day that I work, and I start in the morning. I don't clutter my mind with newspapers.
Yeah,
Although I subscribe to 5, I do look at them later in the day, but I've just found from experience it kind of clutters the mind. And then I go back every morning and look at what I wrote the day before. And it's just amazing
Yeah.
how much things change and germinate. And what's the right word? They age or marinate. That's the word I'm looking for. Oh,
yeah.
by
That's a good
time.
word.
And so you write
Yeah.
something one day, if you look at it the next day, it'll look a little different. You'll see things you want to improve. And so some of the things I write, I dare say I go over as many as 20 times before I'm satisfied with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's a
Yeah.
good discipline to stick with that.
Alan, we like to say that our goal in fundraising is to get the donor prospects to know, to like, and to trust us. How can we instill that in our writing?
To get the audience to have confidence in what you're doing, to sense your sincerity. Is that the gist of it? What you were talking about?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Well, I think your modus operandi has a lot to do with that. What kind of organization are you? How effective
Yeah.
are you? How confident are you? And that'll come through almost always in good writing. And no one has a need for that anymore than, or a better case to state than an organization is very successful at fundraising for
Yeah.
a very good cause. So it's
Yeah.
it's part of who you are, I think, without making this
Yeah.
oversimplified.
I told you I wanted to add a question. Sometimes you hear the expression, don't worry about that. It will practically write itself. I want to comment after you comment, okay,
Well,
on that.
I would disagree with that completely. I
Me
think it's
too.
antithetical to my experience that I've been writing all my life. I started off, as I said earlier, with the AP, and there's never been a time when I wasn't doing a lot of writing. So I think it's again, it comes back to if it's compelling, if it's good, if it excites, if it holds the attention of an audience. There's always a fair amount of hard work that goes into it, and there's no way that you can get that done with some type of glib approach or something that cuts corners. You have to do the research, and I don't want to make this sound hard. I think sometimes it's comes across as being overly intimidating. I think one of the things that helps us as writers is really enjoying the process. A lot of people don't like to write, but I think if you can focus your attention on getting something really worthwhile written, gradually you will learn to enjoy to write.
Yeah.
And there's really no, maybe raising good children gives you a greater sense of fulfillment, but what I call the bon mot syndrome, the French, the perfect word, so to speak, applies. It gives you great pleasure. Or when you read a passage over that you wrote that you think, wow, that's not bad. I still get a high out of that. And that's a great gift at my advanced age. I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. I wanted to comment, I think everyone who ever said, don't worry, it will practically write itself, they're not the ones doing the writing. They're
That's right.
assigning the writing to
No.
someone else, you know? So that's my 2 cents on that. let's talk about another sticky point, and that's the approval process. You know, let's take a nonprofit. Maybe it has a director of communications. Maybe that director of communications has a staff writer, but ultimately they report to a vice president or a CEO.
Sure.
And okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here. My experience of 40 years is that initially the first 80% of the writing project is accomplished by that primary writer. And then, I mean, that's done probably in a day or two. And then it takes about 2 weeks to go through the approval process. If you have a CEO, if you have a controller, if you have a lawyer, but I guess I'm prejudicing my answer. But what do you recommend for a smooth approval process where, again, you're writing, let's just say for the CEO?
Well, I think that there so much depends on the mood, the temperament, the overall approach of the person you're writing for. I think we have to be, if we want to be prudent and keep our jobs, we need to be respectful of what their views are. My experience is that most CEOs are extremely busy. And if you can, let's say you're writing a speech for them, if you can put something in front of them that is well crafted, that fits their philosophy, their approach to the job, what they've accomplished, all those things, they'll be thanking you. They'll be very appreciative. I don't think you'll encounter a lot of problems in the editing process. But that said, I think one of the lessons, and I've never had it apply to a greater extent than the book I'm working on right now, which is about the history, importance, and future of the research triangle. I'm working out, it's a sponsored project hosted by the North Carolina Biotech Center, which has been incredibly successful. It has a lot of high-level people involved that I interview and who look at chapters as they're written. So the point I'm making here is that that's the best of all worlds to me in this sense. It's highly collaborative. And I cannot stress too strongly, particularly in an organization like those on the line today on this webinar, it has to be collaborative. I don't think there's much room for lone rangers. So I would stress that as kind of a principle to follow, to respect. And I think, if you get red ink written on the first draft, you have to, take a serious look at it and not feel like you're being what's the word, put down in any way. I mean, if you are, I think you'll sense that and have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis. But collaborate, that's a path to, always a path, in my opinion, to better writing.
And I'm just going to jump in here real quick. We've got a question in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read
let's go with it, Michael.
From Chris Murray. He asks, do you keep an ongoing list of
Oh, by
ideas?
the way, we're going to identify Chris Murray is a former colleague from our organization who has really established himself in the, he has a book editing business. Chris, welcome to the community, and what's your question?
So he wrote, do you keep an ongoing list of ideas for books, or do you focus on the project you're working on and don't even think about your next book or potential future books until you're finished? And if so, how do you go about finding a subject?
Well, hi, Chris. It's great that you could get on. It's good to hear from you. Yes, I keep a list. I'm always looking down the road. I have usually, 4 or 5 subjects that I want to write about. I'll give you a good example. I've for years wanted to write about the community I grew up in, which is a very small, very poor little town near the coast of North Carolina. And it's been through a lot of struggles, but it's really beginning to achieved some noteworthy success. And so I've been keeping notes on that subject for a long time. And my family all grew up in this, my wife's family grew up there, and we still have a lot of family there and have a home there. And so I even have a title for that book. The working title is Croatan. Croatan is the word the lost colony left written on a tree when they disappeared in the late 1500s after Sir Walter Raleigh founded that colony. Nobody to this day knows what happened to them. Why that working title? I don't know that that's what would end up on the book cover, but I like it still. And that is synonymous, or Croatan really means lost man. And a lot of ways, the community I grew up in has had experience with losing its way. And I would cite the fact that we have not been respectful of our resources. We've done a lot to, the community hadn't, but its parties very close by polluted the waterways. We have plantation tree farming. We have a serious problem with the aquifer water, fresh water being pumped out daily to fill fish ponds, which are necessary, but we have not been as good with conserving our resources, nor have we been that good with conserving our people resources. So it's a topic that interests me greatly, and I have been collecting information on that for a long time. And I'll just finish by saying that part of what I've kept extensive notes on. We had a very controversial town election a few years ago, and I talked to a lot of people and I have notebooks. So I'm ready to start on that whenever time permits. Or better put, before time runs out.
Hey, we just had a question from Margie Hellshine, and I have to admit, I can't fully explain, but hardly a day goes by in which we don't see the two initials, AI, artificial intelligence. And it's something really, I'm going to do a very simple way explaining. It's letting robots do our writing. In other words, if it's a nonprofit thank you letter, the donor is Alan Paul. The gift size is $500. The gift purpose is scholarships. And the artificial intelligence produces the letter on its own. Do you have any sense that it's coming?
Well, I do think it's coming. I mean, it's already predicted, and I think to some extent shown up in some undergraduate course papers. That's predicted to be a very widespread use for it. I'm not really qualified to talk about AI, although we, in the book I'm writing, we will cover that because the Research Triangle Park has a big presence of AI creators.
Yeah.
Apple Computer has building a huge new campus here, 185 acres. They've got several thousand people, and most of that focus is going to be on AI. Same thing with Google. They have a big operation in Durham. But I've recently read a couple of articles on it that suggest to me that it's not going to replace creativity. It probably could write an acceptable draft of the standard university class paper, maybe even a thesis.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to get in this process, you're not going to get Jane Austen's memorable first sentence. It'll be something considerably more prosaic now this is more of a hunch. I don't know. I could be proven wrong.
Yeah.
But I will have to address this subject for this book. And I have a great, looks like a great book on my shelf called The Code Breakers, written by a New York Timesman based in Silicon Valley, that deals with that. And so it goes back to your example at the beginning, about writing different kinds of books. I'm a generalist. I'll have to learn a lot about that subject in order to write about it. I am interested in it. I am very intimidated by it, but it's part of the task, so it has to be done. A lot of it falls in the category.
You were making the point, and we just have a few minutes left here. We're all limited by time. I don't
Yes.
care if Alan Paul, Jim Eskin, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, you know, you have 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. How do you recommend nonprofits decide what to communicate to their donors and their prospective donors about?
Well, I think that's going to vary a lot from organization to organization. That's obvious. But I think that to let them know that you're trying to pursue all angles and that you're not wedded to some hidebound, we did it this way back then and it's still good this way. That doesn't mean they're not new solutions. I think you want the leadership to know that you're looking for those new solutions. You're capable of finding them, capable of implementing them, and have the flexibility to improvise on the fly as necessary.
Okay, we just have a few minutes left here. As I expected, time has just flown by. Alan, I gotta warn you, when you do a good job, we invite you back. And I want to say the external factors were a lot better this time. The first time we did this, there was something called an insurrection going on in the Capitol. And
That's
then we were
right.
going to do this on February 1st. But in San Antonio, we lost power. So we had to reschedule this. But if this has been a wonderful hour and we're going to ask you back again. But I want to see, is there a final question we can work in from the audience?
Is there a final question I can get offered to the audience?
I'm seeing, no, I'm seeing the audience has a final question for you.
Oh, okay. Good.
Okay, Alan, you weren't expecting this. I guess your writing career started with the Associated Press. Is that correct?
That's right.
Do you remember your first story?
I don't remember the very first one. I was on what was called the state
Well,
collection.
what does one stand out? You know, at the
Yeah, I can
beginning of
tell
your
you, I can
career?
tell you one that stands out most vividly in my mind. We had a radio wire that stopped every hour and a bell system, and the bells would go off 1 through 5 for depending on the significance of the story. I had heard 1 4 bell ring on the radio wire, which would stop, and we would file copy out on that machine. And I went over to look at it, and it said 5 young children drowned today in Winston-Salem when they broke through ice on a frozen pond. I'll never forget that. That was one of the first experiences. But then a little later, one of the most memorable incidents of my entire career was I was sitting at the state collection wire and the bells went off. And again, I had to get up and look at what was going on and then think about whether something new needed to be added. So I heard the 5th bell go off, and that was the only time I had ever heard that. And I got up and ran to the machine and looked down, and it said, President Kennedy has just been shot in Dallas.
Wow. Wow.
So,
Let's hope there are not too many 5 bells like that.
Well,
Alan, I want to again,
yeah, I'd just say it's
Go ahead.
one of the most horrifying experiences of my life.
yeah, that all of us will never forget where we were. Of course, now we're thinking it's 60 years from this, and Andrew
Right.
reminds me more time has passed from this than her father's birth and the closing of the Civil War. I mean,
That's
we
right.
lose perspective on time. But I want to thank folks, for better or for worse. This is the very remarkable individual who taught me about writing and taught me a lot else. And I want to thank him for the role he played on getting my career pointed in the right direction. Thank you, Alan. And
Well, thank you,
for the
Jim. I've really
contributions
enjoyed
you
doing
made.
this.
You've given us 4 fantastic books.
Well, thank you.
So we want to thank our learning community of professional and volunteer nonprofit leaders. And we'll see you on March 1st when we'll be talking about capital campaigns. Ellen, thank you for a wonderful hour.
Thank you too. I enjoyed it.
Okay, good night. And what we're going to do, we're going to post a very short summary